Hi guys, I'm Woodcraft Hamster, and I thought I would do a little video for you today that I've been putting off for quite some time, and that's to talk about knives in the UK. Now I want to start off by saying I'm by no means an expert. Don't take anything I say as gospel. This is just my understanding. Now the reason for doing this video, I've been having a lot of conversations recently, with some people from overseas, so you can understand the sort of their lack of understanding, if you like, of UK knife laws, but also a lot of people that live over here, and it just seems to be a bit of general confusion, a lack of understanding, if you like. So I thought I'd just kind of offer up, as I say, my understanding of how it works. Now, for me, the knife laws almost come in two parts. The first part is that it is illegal to carry any knife. Actually, that's not quite true, but let me persevere. It's illegal to carry any knife without good reason. Now, the important thing here is good reason. And I'll move on to it a little bit later, but the difficulty is, how do you define a good reason? Because it's not actually set out in the legislation as to what that is. The second part of the law for me is that there is an exemption to that, which allows you to carry a knife under 3 inches, or a blade under 3 inches, with a non-locking blade. And this is where I think people get confused. So when I've got some examples here, this is just a little folding pen knife. There's no lock on this blade, and it's under 3 inches long. I can carry this with me anywhere in the UK, with a couple of exceptions, but I can carry this anywhere in the UK and not be committing any kind of offence. I can have it in my pocket. I can use it for certain things. That again, law gets a little bit grey there, but I'll move on to that. And in comparison, this knife here, I'll give you, actually, let me put both of them together. So these are almost identical in size, shape. This one's obviously looks a little bit more, I don't know, tactical, I think is the phrase. But basically, this one is perfectly legal to carry, and this one isn't, because it has a lock on it. Now, that's the legal to carry section, and I'll go into a bit more detail on that in a little bit. But these knives, you know, people seem to get really confused. What can I carry? What can't I carry? What can I use it for? What can't I use it for? Now, sticking with the, 3-inch non-locking knife, you know, I have one of these in my pocket or in my rucksack pretty much at all times. But this is where the law gets a little bit grey. What can I actually use it for? If I'm at work, I need to cut open a box, cut a piece of string, whatever, absolutely fine. However, what I wouldn't do, and this is kind of where common sense prevails here, you know, I could sit there in a public park with an apple, let's say, and I could sit there cutting slices of that apple and eating them. Certain places that's perfectly acceptable. Would I go and do it in central London? Probably not. I'm not breaking any laws by doing that, but it's not the kind of place where you really want to put the law to the test. Now, I know there'll be people who disagree with that and say, well, yeah, the law is the law, you know, if you're allowed to do it, why not? Now, this is where another sort of grey area of the law comes in. So if I have this knife and I was whittling a spoon on a bench in a park, or, as I say, eating an apple or something like that, I'm not breaking any laws. However, if somebody was to walk past me and become distressed because I have a knife in my hand, even though I'm not using it in a threatening manner, I'm not threatening them with it, I'm not threatening anyone else with it, there are some people who are just genuinely, you know, they see a knife of any description, and they will become distressed, because we're now in a culture generally in the UK, and I think in a lot of parts of the world, where any sort of sight of a knife rings alarm bells. Sorry about the planes, guys. And the problem with that is that you can be carrying out a perfectly legal anything with a knife. You know, you say you could be whittling a spoon, you could be eating a piece of fruit, you could be doing whatever, and you're not doing anything wrong. But because somebody else has become distressed by the fact that you are holding a knife, and if they were to make a phone call to the police, there is a very grey area of the law where because you have caused distress to a member of the public, you're then on very rocky ground. Now the problem is, and I've realised I'll probably get some flack for this, a lot of police officers, and I know some of them very well, and it certainly isn't everybody, but the stance on knives within the UK is a very strong one, and a lot of police officers kind of, how can I put this in a polite way, I think part of it is a lack of understanding of the law, and part of it is this kind of zero tolerance approach, where they will see a knife, I have a phone call about somebody with a knife, and they will turn up, and I absolutely agree with that. If somebody makes a call to the police and says there is somebody in this park or on this street with a knife, absolutely they have to attend. The problem being is when they turn up and find you calmly carving pieces off of an apple or whatever, a lot of police officers don't fully understand that, say, this knife and this knife, there's a big difference between them. If I was using this in a public area to cut an apple, I would be breaking the law. If I was using this knife, I wouldn't be. But because somebody's become distressed, that's where the problem comes in, and it is a very grey area, and sometimes, you know, the police will take as I say, a very zero tolerance stance on this. And as I say, I mean, from a bushcraft point of view, you know, common sense, if you're going to be using a knife out in the woodlands and things like that, you know, make sure you're not in a very busy public woodland, make sure there's not lots of dog walkers and families and these kind of people around. You know, most of us practice bushcraft in quite secluded areas because that's part of the joy of being out in nature, and kind of, you know, you don't want to be going to a really small busy public woodland. Appreciate some of us don't have an option with that, but you know, if you do, you know, try and get yourself in somewhere where it is quite secluded, away from the walking paths and that kind of thing. So that is the UK legal knives, if you like. So, you know, a penknife, a Swiss Army knife, that kind of thing, anything with a small non-locking under 3-inch blade you can have on your person. The exceptions to that is there are certain private establishments, usually things like pubs, nightclubs, those kind of things, that have a zero or, you know, a ban on any kind of bladed implement, which makes perfect sense. And as a private establishment, they are allowed to operate that. Also, things like government buildings, courthouses, those kind of things. I actually made the mistake a few years ago. I was on jury service, and I went in through the security checkpoint. I had my keys on me, and on my keys I have a small Swiss Army knife. And I had a very difficult conversation with the security guy there. I explained to him the situation, and he very kindly agreed, because it was my first day there on jury service. He said, what I'll do, I'll take it off you, we'll hold it, we'll give it back to you when you leave, don't bring it again, which I thought was actually a really good way of dealing with it. You know, he could have very easily taken it off me and not returned it. But anyway, that's going slightly off track. The second part that I wanted to talk about was things like this. Now, this is a particularly, move it a bit closer, this is obviously a very military looking kind of tactical knife. Now, the law does say that you will be committing offence if you carry any knife without good reason. So in theory, I could have this with me out in a public place if I had a good reason for carrying it. Now, this particular knife, I think really I would struggle to find a good reason for having this. Something like this, which is my little TBS bore, you know, it's a locking knife, it's longer than 3 inches. Now, if I was out in the woodland and I was doing a bit of bushcraft, I could try to argue at least that I had a good reason for carrying this. And this is the bit I wanted to get onto in terms of bushcraft, camping, outdoor pursuits. There seems to be a real grey area, and again the legislation doesn't help in this sense, that our hobbies such as bushcraft considered a good reason to carry a knife. And the short answer is, I think it would really come down to firstly the police officer, and secondly any judge if it went that far. Now, I think you'd probably, and again this is just my thoughts, you know, don't base you know, carrying knives necessarily on this, but I think, you know, it will really come down to partly you and your attitude and what you're doing with it, how you're doing it, As I said earlier, you know, if you're in a busy public park or a busy public woodland, and you know, and you're sort of flailing around with somebody, even if you're not being sort of threatening with it, you know, you're sitting there and you're kind of cutting up branches or, you know, whatever. You know, it can be quite difficult to then demonstrate that, you know, what you're doing is actually part of a hobby. Having something like this, and it really shouldn't be this way, but I think, again, the common sense approach is if you take something that is hopefully considered not particularly offensive, you know, something like this knife here has a very sort of camping and bushcraft feel to it, whereas something like this, I appreciate one's a fixed blade and one's locking, but you know, for the purpose of this, they both fall under the same regulations in the law. And you know, that was really the point of this video. You know, something like a Mora, you know, has that very utilitarian, you know, bushcrafty feel to it, as opposed to, you know, one of these Rambo style knives and things like that. I appreciate, you know, people use what they use, but you know, if you're going to be going out into the public, public areas, should I say, you know, one is keep yourself, as far as is practical, sort of hidden away, you know, away from prying eyes. The chances of a police officer coming across you in the middle of the woodland are very, very low. Forestry officers not so much, but they tend to have a slightly better head on their shoulders and they'll kind of understand what you're doing. And if anything, you know, if you're doing something that's not allowed in that woodland, you probably get more in trouble for that than you would having a knife with you. And again, if you're in a, you know, I suppose my advice would be, you know, stay away from heavy public areas. You know, yes, we all like going down to the local park and things like that, but do you really need to take a knife with you? And really that's sort of the crux of this video is, you know, if you're going to be using a knife for your bushcraft, which a lot of us will do, it's kind of, you know, I think a lot of people see it as a fundamental part of bushcraft, myself included, you know, whether it's making things or camp tasks and stuff like that. You know, it's a really, really useful tool to have. But if you're going to do it, be sensible with it. You know, as I say, I always have something like this in my pocket, and if I'm going to use it, I will always consider my surroundings. Is there anybody, and the problem is nowadays, is general members of the public who are not into anything like bushcraft or related kind of hobbies, will not really see the great difference between this and this. You know, with the current climate, especially here in the UK, you know, as I'm sure a lot of people around the world are aware, there have been a number of terrorist attacks, a lot of them involving knives. And I suppose another, you know, point to make with this video is, you know, if you are a bushcrafter and you know you are going out with knives, make sure that they, how can I put this, you know, use a bit of common sense, because, you know, we've seen this in the UK before. You know, when there's been issues with knives, you know, you get lots of knee-jerk reactions. You know, there was kind of a blanket, wasn't so much a ban, it was an amnesty a number of years ago, and a lot of people were kind of handing in knives to police stations. And again, even during that time period, a lot of people didn't quite understand what was going on, and the people that were handing in a lot of these knives were under the impression, that the wrong impression I might add, that you had to do so. Now, very, very few of the knives that were handed in were actually breaking the law. You know, there were, you know, trench knives with knuckle dusters on them, there were push knives and balisongs and things like that, and they are illegal, and I won't go into that in this video, it's not important enough for what we're talking about, but there are a number of knives under the regulations that are considered illegal through and through. Flick knives are a good example of that. You know, you are not allowed to own them in the UK at all. But you know, these knives I've got in front of me, you know, even this big monster of a thing, and beyond, you know, machetes, swords, all this kind of thing, you know, you can legally own them and you're allowed to have them in your private residence. The difficulty becomes is when you take them outside of your home or outside of the area you have, the, you know, privately owned land or whatever that you have permission to use them on. And you're out in the public, essentially. You know, you're on a public road, you're on a high street, you're in a public park, public woodland, whatever it may be. So really this video was just to kind of hopefully, although I've realised what we're at now, nearly 15 minutes in, so I will wrap this up fairly quickly. But you know, we've kind of covered, you know, the sub 3 inch non-locking knives, you know, with those, as I say, legally you can carry them around with you to your heart's content, but just be sensible and take a step back and have a think about what you're going to do with it before taking it out of your pocket if you're out in the public. And then these bigger locking knives or fixed blade knives, you know, you are allowed to own them, and this is what I think a lot of people don't understand or get wrong, is that, oh, you know, this is a big scary looking knife, you can't have it. Well, actually you can, but you have to keep it either in your private residence, which is kind of the safest option, but if you do take it out with you somewhere, you know, you have to have a good reason for using it. Just because you think it's a good reason, you know, again, take a step back, you know, will a police officer or will a judge also agree with you that it's a good reason? That's always the risk with any kind of knife, I think. But not only that, transporting it. So let's say, you know, you've got this and you have a piece of woodland that you've very fortunately been able to get agreement with the landowner that you can use for bushcraft. If this is your knife that you're using, there's nothing wrong with that. When you're going from your house to the woodland, keep it in its sheath, put it in a rucksack, make sure it's sort of buried fairly low down to the bottom, because what you want to do, if you ever get stopped, and you know, stop and search is not as prevalent as it once was over here, but if you do get stopped and they want to look inside your pack, you know, it really does help to sort of, you know, you're pulling things out and towards the bottom, you know, obviously if it was me, I would tell the police officer there was a knife in my bag before we began the search. Take it out, as, you know, and you can at least demonstrate that, you know, it wasn't sitting on the top, it wasn't dangling off of one of the side straps or something like that. You know, it was deep in the bag where I can't access it, and that's what, you know, will help you if you ever did go to court for that, something like that. You say, well, actually, I was transporting it from place A to place B, both of which I have permission to have this knife. One's my home, one's private woodland, and I was just transporting it. You know, it wasn't on my belt, it wasn't in a pocket where I could easily reach it, it was in a rucksack, it was buried down quite deep, you know, and what you're trying to demonstrate there, or what your defence essentially will be trying to demonstrate, is that you weren't just carrying this knife around and at any point you can just grab it and pull it out and do whatever. You know, it was being transported kind of as securely as you can in order to get from place A to place B. So I hope that kind of makes sense, guys. I mean, by all means, you know, if you want to have a bit of a further chat about this in the comments, you know, you want to discuss it a bit further, please do let me know. It's a topic that I think there's a lot of confusion surrounding. You know, if anyone's got any points they disagree with, you know, by all means chime in. I'm happy to have a chat about it. But it was just something that after sort of several conversations recently, I really just kind of wanted to do a bit of a video about, just get some information as I understand it out there. Just if nothing else, to kind of dispel some of these kind of myths that people have, that, you know, this is completely illegal and you're just not allowed to have it, and, you know, this is okay under certain conditions, etc. So I hope it was useful, guys. As I say, please do comment down below, hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I hope you'll all join me next time. Thanks, guys.